You wait before dawn in a small bamboo house on the island of Seram. The darkness inside is complete, and your eyes open without urgency, adjusting to the familiar shape of the low roof and the faint grey outline of the window frame. A thin woven mat covers the floor, and you lie on a sleeping pallet of packed pandanus leaves that rustle softly when you shift your weight. The air is cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth from the ground beneath the stilted floor and a faint salt tang that has travelled inland from the sea. You listen to the silence, which is not true silence because a cricket rasps somewhere beneath the house and a distant rooster calls once across the valley, its voice small and thin in the heavy pre-morning air. You sit up slowly, placing your bare feet on the mat, and take a moment to breathe in the quiet. Your house has one room with walls of split bamboo that allow the night air to pass through, and you can feel the gentle movement of it against your skin. Through the window you see nothing but a deep grey blankness, the mist lying thick over the village so that even the nearest palm trunks are invisible. You stand and cross to the earthen water jar in the corner, dipping a coconut shell cup into its cool contents, drinking slowly while the first wash of wakefulness clears your mind. The water tastes faintly of the clay from which the jar was fired, a mineral flavour that is as familiar as your own name. You light a small oil lamp made from a half coconut shell with a twisted fibre wick, and the yellow flame pushes back the shadows, revealing the simple interior of your home. A shelf holds a few carved wooden bowls, a stack of folded cloth, and a bundle of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. In one corner rests the iron adze with its curved blade and short wooden handle, the wooden mallet made from a dense chunk of ironwood, and the length of twisted bark rope that you will use later in the day. These tools wait patiently, their surfaces dull and smooth from years of handling. You run a finger along the adze blade, checking its edge by habit, and find it still sharp from yesterday's honing. You step out onto the narrow veranda made of split bamboo poles lashed together with rattan. The planks creak under your weight with a sound as familiar as your own heartbeat. The mist is everywhere now, thick and cool, beading on the hairs of your arms. It smells of damp vegetation, of the swamp beyond the village, of the sago palms themselves, whose presence you can sense even when they are hidden from view. The village is a collection of perhaps 20 houses similar to your own, each standing on stilts amid a clearing hacked from the forest long ago. You can see the faint glow of another lamp in a house some distance away, a fuzzy orange dot in the grey, and you know that others are also beginning their day. You descend the notched log that serves as a ladder and walk across the packed earth to the cooking shelter, a small lean-to with a raised hearth of clay and stone. There you kneel and arrange a handful of dry palm fibres beneath a pyramid of twigs, striking a spark from flint and iron with patient practice motions. The fire catches and grows, and you feed it larger sticks until a comfortable blaze warms the air and drives back the dampness. You set a clay pot of water over the flame and add a cup of rice from the sack inside the house, the grains rattling dry and hard as you pour them. As the water heats, you sit on a log beside the fire, watching the steam rise and mingle with the mist, the two kinds of vapor indistinguishable. While the porridge cooks, you think about the day ahead. The sago palm you will work on today stands at the edge of the freshwater swamp, a half-hour's walk from the village, a mature tree that you have been watching for the past month as its trunk swelled and its fronds began to yellow at the tips. The starch inside that trunk has reached its peak, and today you will begin the long process of extracting it. The timing is good because the Dutch East India Company ship will anchor in the bay within the next 2 weeks, and the traders will expect their usual quantity of dried sago flour packed in clean cotton sacks. You know this rhythm as you know the tides and the phases of the moon: plant, harvest, process, trade, rest, and then begin again. The rice porridge thickens, bubbling gently, and you stir it with a long wooden spoon. You add a pinch of salt from a small bamboo container with a stopper of rolled leaf. When the porridge is ready, soft and warm, you ladle it into a wooden bowl and eat slowly, sitting on the log with the fire crackling in front of you and the mist pressing in on all sides. The porridge has little flavor beyond its own gentle starchiness and the salt, but it fills your stomach and warms you from within. You eat every spoonful, scraping the bowl clean with the edge of the spoon, and then rinse it with a splash of water from the pot, flicking the droplets onto the earth. After eating, you wash your face and hands in a basin of water set on a stump outside the cooking shelter. The water is cool, and you splash it over your neck and the back of your head, feeling the last traces of sleep leave you. The sky above is beginning to lighten, the grey shifting from deep charcoal to a softer silver, and you can now make out the shapes of the nearest palm trees, their fronds drooping in the still air like the wings of resting birds. The mist is thinning slowly, retreating into the hollows and the swamp, and the world is emerging piece by piece, as if being carefully unwrapped. You gather your tools for the day's work, the iron adze with its blade wrapped in a scrap of oiled cloth, the wooden mallet, the coil of bark rope, and the woven carrying basket that you will use to transport the sago fibre later. You also take the rasping board, a flat plank of wood into which sharp chips of stone have been set in neat rows, though you will not need it until after the palm is felled and stripped. Each tool has its own weight and balance, familiar to your hands. You test the edge of the adze one more time against your thumb, not to cut but to feel the bite of the metal, and then you tuck it under your arm. You slip your feet into a pair of simple sandals woven from palm fibre, not because the path is harsh, but because the ground in the swamp will be wet and full of small roots that can catch bare toes. A gourd of drinking water hangs from a cord over your shoulder, and you take a small packet of cold rice wrapped in a banana leaf for a midday meal. The fire in the cooking shelter has burned down to embers, and you scatter ash over it with a stick before leaving, though you will return later in the afternoon. The village is waking now. You hear the low murmur of voices from a house nearby, the soft thud of a pestle grinding something in a wooden mortar. A child laughs somewhere, and a dog trots across the clearing with its tail low, pausing to sniff at a clump of grass before disappearing between two huts. You walk past these signs of life without hurry, heading toward the edge of the village where the path enters the forest. An old man sits on his veranda weaving a fishing net, his fingers moving with the slow precision of long practice. He glances up as you pass and gives a slight nod, and you return the gesture, a wordless acknowledgement that is the only greeting needed. The path beyond the village is a ribbon of bare red earth winding between tall trees and dense undergrowth. The mist still clings here, thicker than in the open clearing, and the fronds of ferns brush against your shins, leaving trails of cool moisture on your skin. The ground is soft from the night's condensation, and your sandals make a faint squelching sound with each step, a sound that soon becomes so regular that you stop noticing it altogether. You pass beneath a giant fig tree whose aerial roots hang like curtains, and you duck under a low branch that has grown across the path over many seasons, its bark worn smooth by the passage of bodies. The forest is full of sounds, all of them gentle, the drip of water from leaves high above, the distant call of a black-naped oriole fluting through the canopy, the hum of insects that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You notice how the light changes as you walk, the silver of early dawn giving way to a pale gold that filters through the leaves in shifting patterns. The air warms by slow degrees, and the scent of decaying leaves rises from the forest floor, rich and dark and sweet, mixing with the green smell of living plants. You follow the path without needing to think, your feet finding the way automatically as they have done hundreds of times before. The route dips toward a narrow stream where the water moves clear and slow over a bed of grey and brown pebbles. A log has been laid across the stream, its top surface worn flat by generations of feet, and you cross it carefully, looking down at the water as it slides past beneath you. Tiny fish dart in the shallows, silver flickers that vanish into shadow the moment they sense your presence. On the far bank, the path rises slightly and continues through a stretch of secondary forest where the trees are younger and the undergrowth thinner. Here you can see the sago palms more clearly, their tall trunks rising from the damp soil like columns in a vast green hall. Most are young, their trunks not yet ready for harvest, but a few show the thickening at the base and the slight yellowing of the lower fronds that indicate maturity. You pass them by, knowing that each will have its turn in another season, another year. The rhythm of this work is measured not in days, but in the slow pulse of growth and starch accumulation, a clock set by sun and rain and soil. The path narrows as you approach the freshwater swamp, and the ground becomes spongy underfoot, water seeping up around your sandals with each step. You step onto a series of raised hummocks that form a natural causeway through the marsh. each hummock crowned with a tuft of spiky sedge. The air here is thicker and warmer, smelling of mud and stagnant water and the swilt scent of flowering plants you cannot see. Frogs plop into the water as you pass, their splashes small and quick. A dragonfly with wings of electric blue hovers in front of you for a moment, then darts away on a zigzag path. At the edge of the swamp stands the palm you have come for, a mature metroxylon sags that has grown here for perhaps 15 years. Its trunk rises straight and tall, thicker than your waist, covered with the old leaf bases that spiral upward like a pattern of overlapping shields. At the very top, the crown of fronds arches outward, some of them beginning to yellow and droop. You walk around the tree slowly, examining it from every angle. The trunk shows the distinctive bulge just above its midpoint, the sure sign that the starch reserves have reached their maximum. You press your palm against the rough bark, feeling the solidity of the wood beneath, the weight of all that stored food waiting to be released. You set your tools down on a dry hummock nearby, arranging them neatly on a folded cloth. The adze gleams faintly in the filtered light. The mallet's head is dark with age and oil. The coil of rope lies curled like a sleeping snake. You sit down on a fallen log that has lain at the edge of this swamp for longer than anyone can remember, its surface covered with a soft green moss that is dry to the touch. From this vantage point you look at the palm and at the surrounding swamp, the water glinting between the sedges, the trees on the far side fading into a green haze. You take the gourd from your shoulder and drink. The water's still cool, despite the warming air. Then you unwrap the banana leaf packet of rice and eat a few mouthfuls, chewing slowly while you watch the light strengthen. A small bird lands on a branch above you, tilts its head, and then flies off again. The morning has unfolded without hurry, each action following the one before in a seamless chain, and now you are ready. You stand, stretch your arms and shoulders, and walk toward the palm, the adze in your hand, the day's work about to begin. You leave the house carrying your tools, your bare feet pressing into the soft earth of the trail that connects the village to the deeper forest. The mist has thinned enough now so that you can see the outline of each palm trunk you pass, the grey light filtering through the fronds and painting long pale streaks across the ground. Your sandals are still damp from the earlier walk, but you do not mind. The coolness feels pleasant against your skin as you move at a steady, unhurried pace, the coil of bark rope swinging gently from your shoulder and the adze tucked securely under your arm. The carrying basket is empty and light on your back, woven from split rattan and a pattern you learned as a child. Its straps made from softened bark fibre that does not chafe even after many hours. The path winds past other homes still wrapped in the quiet of early morning, their bamboo walls pale against the green backdrop, their verandas empty and their cook fires not yet lit. A thin wisp of smoke rises from one distant roof, spreading into a soft blue haze that mingles with the retreating mist. You step around a taro patch, where broad heart-shaped leaves collect droplets of dew that tremble with every small movement of the air. Beyond the garden, banana plants stand in a neat cluster, their long leaves torn into ribbons by the wind of previous days, though this morning there is no wind at all, and everything hangs motionless as if the world has paused between one breath and the next. The path narrows as it leaves the village clearing and enters a stretch of secondary forest where the undergrowth presses closer on either side. Ferns grow thickly here, their curled young fronds pushing up through the leaf litter like the necks of small green violins, while older fronds arch outward and brush softly against your shins, leaving trails of cool moisture that the warming air quickly dries. You notice how the light changes under the canopy, shifting from open grey to a filtered, muted green that makes the forest feel like the inside of a vast room walled with leaves. The ground beneath your feet is carpeted with fallen foliage in shades of brown and amber, each leaf releasing a faint, sweet scent as it slowly returns to soil. You follow the same route you have walked countless times, your feet finding the familiar dips and rises without conscious thought. The trail descends slightly toward a stream you can hear long before you see it, a low, continuous murmur that grows steadily louder as you approach, the sound of water moving over stones in a gentle, unbroken flow. A butterfly with wings the color of dried cinnamon flits across your path, and you pause to watch it settle on a flowering vine, its wings opening and closing once before it lifts again and disappears into the shadows. The pause is brief, a natural part of the rhythm rather than an interruption, and then you continue walking. The stream comes into view through a screen of tall grasses, its surface glinting where small openings in the canopy let through shafts of pale sunlight. The water is clear to its pebbled bottom, and you can see the shapes of stones worn smooth by the current, shades of grey and brown, and the occasional flash of white quartz. A log bridge spans the stream, a single trunk of a fallen tree that was dragged here long ago and flattened on top by the passage of generations, its bark long since worn away to reveal the pale, polished wood beneath, grooved slightly down the center where countless feet have traveled. You step onto the bridge without hesitation, the wood solid and familiar under your soles, and walk across while looking down at the water sliding past beneath you, noticing the way it catches the light and scatters it into shifting patterns on the underside of the overhanging leaves. On the far bank, the path rises again and continues through a section of forest where the trees grow taller and further apart, their trunks straight and grey-barked, rising to a high canopy that rustles softly, though you can feel no breeze at ground level. The air here carries a different scent, less of damp earth and more of living green, a clean, sharp fragrance like crushed leaves. Birds call from somewhere high above, notes that drift down through the layers of foliage as faint and sweet as distant bells, and you recognize the fluting song of a black-naped oriole, the repetitive two-note whistle of a barbet, the soft cooing of a green pigeon hidden among the branches. You do not look for them. You simply let the sounds wash over you as part of the morning's texture, a background that has accompanied these walks since you were young enough to be carried along this same trail. The ground underfoot changes gradually from packed red soil to something softer and darker, a rich humus that springs slightly with each step. This is where the influence of the swamp begins to reach into the forest, the water table rising close to the surface and feeding the roots of plants that thrive in permanent moisture. You notice different species here, the tall, slender trunks of nibung palms with their rings of sharp spines, the spreading buttress roots of a giant gelatong tree that rise from the ground like wooden walls, the clusters of wild ginger with their broad leaves and hidden red flowers at the base. Each plant has its place, and you know them all by name, though you rarely speak those names aloud, carrying them instead as quiet knowledge stored in your memory. The trail branches now, a smaller path leading off toward a different part of the swamp where another family tends their own sago palms, and you take the right-hand fork without pausing, following a track that is slightly less worn, the grass growing a little taller between the wheel ruts left by the single buffalo cart that sometimes comes this way to haul heavy loads of starch back to the village during the busy season. The grass is wet with dew that has not yet evaporated in the shaded portions of the path, and your feet leave dark impressions that slowly fill with water, then fade behind you as the ground springs back. You begin to see the sago palms now, not the young ones that cluster at the edge of the forest, but the mature specimens that stand within the swamp itself, their trunks thick and tall, their crowns high above the surrounding vegetation. Each one occupies its own space, surrounded by water and sedges and the low, bushy growth of swamp pandan, with its spiky leaves that catch at your clothing if you stray too close to their edges. The palms grow at various stages of development, some still thin and juvenile with their fronds a bright, eager green, others in their prime with the characteristic swelling of the trunk that signals readiness, a few already collapsed and rotting, their starch spent and their life cycle complete, returning to the swamp from which they grew. You pass by several that are not yet ready, their trunks slender and their crowns still a uniform deep green without a trace of yellow, knowing that they will require another season or two of rain and sun before they accumulate enough starch in their pith to be worth the labor of harvesting. One palm stands slightly tilted, its roots undermined by the slow movement of water, and you make a mental note that it may fall on its own before it can be processed, its starch lost to the swamp, unless someone comes to harvest it early. Another shows the unmistakable bulge near its midpoint, the lower fronds beginning to yellow and droop, and you know that this one belongs to a neighbor who will come for it within the month. There is no rushing these things. Each tree has its own clock, its own season, and the village shares an unspoken understanding of who will take which palm and when. The ground becomes progressively wetter as you leave the solid forest floor behind and enter the swamp proper, stepping from one raised hummock to the next along a route that is less a path and more a series of dry islands connected by memory. Your sandals squelch in the mud between hummocks, the dark, peaty soil oozing up around the edges of the fibre, black and rich and full of tiny bubbles of gas released by the decay of 1,000 years of fallen leaves. Frogs call from hidden pools among the sedges, a chorus of clicks and trills that rises and falls with no apparent pattern. And a white egret stands motionless in the shallows, some distance away, its reflection perfect in the dark water, its neck curved like the handle of a porcelain cup. The palm you have come for waits at the very edge of the swamp, where the water is shallowest and the ground slightly firmer, a lone tree that has grown here for 15 or more years, its existence recorded in the layers of leaf scars that spiral up its trunk. You approach it slowly, pausing to take in its full height from base to crown, noting the solid thickness of the bole and the subtle sheen of the bark where the morning light strikes it at an angle. The trunk is straight and true, not tilted or twisted, which will make the felling easier and safer, and the crown is full, but showing the first signs of maturity in the yellowing tips of the oldest fronds, the slight droop of leaves that once stood rigidly upright. You walk all the way around the tree, your feet squelching in the shallow water that laps at the base of the trunk, and you see that the ground is firm enough to work on. A patch of damp but solid earth, ringed by sedges and a few low ferns. The roots of the palm spread wide beneath the surface, anchoring it against the storms that sometimes sweep across the island, and you can feel their presence underfoot, a network of woody cables hidden in the mud. You stop in front of the trunk and reach out to press your palm flat against the bark, which is rough and cool, and slightly damp with condensed mist. Through that touch you sense the solidity of the wood, the immense weight of the starch stored in the pith within, the living silence of a tree that has spent its whole life preparing for this single moment of use. You set your tools down on the driest patch of ground you can find, arranging them carefully so that nothing will roll into the water or be lost in the mud. The adze lies on a folded square of oiled cloth to protect its edge. The wooden mallet rests beside it. The coil of bark rope is placed on a tuft of sedge to keep it clean. You remove the carrying basket from your back and set it nearby, then take the gourd of drinking water and place it in the shade of a broad-leafed shrub where it will remain cool throughout the morning. The banana leaf packet of cold rice follows, tucked into the same shady spot, a small meal waiting for the midday pause that is still hours away. Now you stand for a moment and look around at the swamp, the water shimmering between the clumps of sedge, the tall palms rising like pillars into the brightening sky, the forest a dark green wall on the far side. A kingfisher darts from a branch above, a flash of turquoise and rust that dips low over the water and then vanishes into the trees. The air is warm and heavy now, full of the scent of mud and green growth and the faint sweet perfume of some flowering tree you cannot identify. The sounds of the swamp settle around you like a blanket, the hum of insects, the slow drip of water from the tips of leaves, the distant call of a hornbill carrying across the treetops. Everything is calm and still and perfectly in its place, including you, including the tree, including the tools that wait on the ground. You flex your fingers and roll your shoulders, loosening the muscles that will soon be called into steady work, feeling the readiness in your body that comes from years of doing this same task in this same place. Then you pick up the adze and step toward the base of the trunk, positioning yourself on the side that faces away from the swamp, where the ground is most solid and the angle of your swing will be unobstructed. You take a moment to study the bark, choosing the exact spot for the first cut, and then you raise the iron blade and bring it down in a smooth, deliberate stroke, the sound of the impact a low, solid thwack that echoes once, and then is swallowed by the soft, damp air. You pause, check the notch you have made, and raise the adze again, settling into the slow, patient rhythm that will carry you through the morning and into the afternoon. The first of many cuts in the long, quiet process of releasing the starch from the heart of the sago palm. The sago palm stands alone at the edge of the freshwater swamp, its trunk rising straight from the damp soil without a single bend or lean to mar its vertical line. You stop a few paces away and let your gaze travel from the base upward, tracing the column of rough grey bark that rises taller than three men standing on each other's shoulders, the old leaf bases spiraling around it like the ridges on a seashell, worn smooth in places where the rain has beaten against them for uncounted seasons. The crown high above is a fountain of fronds, each one the length of a grown man, their leaflets drooping in the still air like green feathers, and you can see the yellow tips of the oldest leaves catching the morning light, a sign as clear as any calendar that the palm has reached its peak and will soon begin its slow decline if left unharvested. You set your tools down on the driest patch of ground you can find, a slight rise where a fallen log has created a natural shelf of compacted earth and woody debris. The adze goes first, its iron blade winking once as you turn it away from the sun, then the wooden mallet with its dark, oil-polished head, then the coil of bark rope that you drape over a nearby shrub to keep it free of mud, the fibers pale and twisted tight, smelling faintly of the tree from which they were stripped, the rasping board you lean against the log, its surface embedded with rows of tiny stone teeth that glitter in the low-angle light. The carrying basket you unstrap from your back and place upside down on a tuft of sedge, so that no insects will crawl into it while you work. Each item finds its place without hurry, and you find yourself moving with the deliberate care that comes from knowing exactly where everything belongs. You straighten up and take a long breath of the swamp air, which is warm and thick and full of the scent of slow decay, of leaves rotting into peat, of water that has stood in the shade for so long that it has taken on the flavor of the roots it bathes. The smell is not unpleasant. It is the smell of life returning to soil, of the endless cycle that turns fallen fronds into the dark mud that feeds the next generation of palms. You have known this scent since you could walk, and it settles in your lungs like a familiar weight, grounding you in the present moment, in the patch of earth where you now stand. You walk slowly around the palm, your feet pressing into the soft ground, leaving prints that fill with water, the color of strong tea. The base of the trunk is wider than the rest, flaring out just above the soil line where the roots grip the earth in a network of woody buttresses that radiate outward like the spokes of a wheel, each one covered with moss and tiny ferns that have colonized the rough bark. You step over these roots carefully, placing your feet in the gaps between them, feeling the solidity of the wood beneath the thin layer of mud. On the far side of the tree, the one that faces into the deeper swamp, the ground drops away slightly, and the water is deeper, lapping against the trunk with a sound so faint it is more like a suggestion than a noise, a whisper of contact between liquid and solid that repeats with each tiny ripple caused by a frog or an insect landing on the surface. You reach out and place your palm flat against the trunk, feeling the texture of the bark, which is rough and fibrous like a very old rope, with vertical cracks that run from the base up into the middle heights, splitting the outer layer into long narrow plates that overlap at their edges. The bark is dry on the sun-facing side, where it has been warmed by the morning light, and slightly damp on the shaded side where the mist has not yet fully evaporated, and you move your hand from one to the other, noting the difference in temperature and moisture without forming any conscious thought about it, simply absorbing the information through your skin. You press harder and feel the slight give of the living tissue beneath, the pith that fills the interior of the trunk, thick and dense with stored starch grains that are too small to see but whose presence you can almost sense through the vibration that travels back into your hand when you tap the wood with your knuckles. You lean close and examine the surface of the bark, noticing the small creatures that make their homes there. A line of ants ascending in single file, each one carrying a tiny fragment of leaf, a grey lichen that spreads in circular patches like spilled paint, a small spider that has woven a web between two of the old leaf bases and now sits motionless at its center, waiting for whatever the day may bring. These lives are so small and so quiet that they seem like part of the tree itself, an extension of its own slow existence, and you watch them for a time without any sense of urgency, the ants moving up and the spider staying still and the lichen simply being grey and flat and perfectly still. You step back and look up again at the crown, shading your eyes with one hand against the growing brightness of the sky. The fronds spread outward in a great circle, and where they attach to the top of the trunk, you can see the tightly packed leaf sheaths that protect the growing point, the heart of the palm from which new leaves emerge one after another in a slow, steady procession. The oldest fronds hang lowest, their leaflets drooping toward the water, and some of them are touched with yellow and brown, the colors of age and approaching death, while the younger ones rise more stiffly, still green and vigorous, reaching for the light. A small bird perches on one of the upper fronds, a sunbird with a metallic green back that flashes as it turns its head, and you watch it for a moment before it darts away. Drawn by the nectar of some flowering vine deeper in the swamp, you complete your slow circuit of the tree and return to the place where your tools lie, stopping beside the fallen log that will serve as your seat during the rest periods to come. The log is covered with a thick cushion of moss, bright green and soft as a woven blanket, and you sit down on it carefully, feeling the moss compress under your weight, and then spring back slightly as you settle. The position is comfortable, your back supported by the natural curve of the wood, your feet resting on the mat of dry leaves that has accumulated at the base of the log, and from here you have a clear view of the sago palm and the surrounding swamp. You take the gourd of drinking water from the shady spot where you placed it earlier and remove the stopper, which is a plug of rolled banana leaf that fits snugly into the narrow neck. The water is still cool despite the rising heat of the day, having been drawn from the deep clay jar in your house before dawn, and you drink slowly, letting each mouthful linger before you swallow, the liquid spreading a clean, neutral taste across your tongue. When you have drunk enough, you replace the stopper and set the gourd back in the shade. Then rest your hands on your knees and let your gaze wander across the scene in front of you. The swamp water stretches away between the trunks of other sago palms that stand like sentinels in the greenish light, their reflections wavering on the dark surface. Patches of open water alternate with thick stands of sedge and the broad floating leaves of water lilies that have not yet opened their flowers for the day, the buds still tight and green, bobbing gently with each small movement of the water. A soft breeze stirs the tops of the palms, but down here at ground level the air remains perfectly still, as thick and heavy as warm syrup, and you can see tiny insects dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierce the canopy, their wings catching the light in brief silver flashes. The hum of the swamp is continuous and layered, made up of the drone of bees somewhere nearby, the clicking of a gecko hidden in the undergrowth, the distant croak of a bullfrog, and beneath all of that, the almost subaudible sound of water, moving, seeping, evaporating, condensing, the quiet respiration of a wet world. You sit and look at the sago palm and plan the work ahead, though the planning is less a matter of conscious thought than a kind of mental rehearsal, a picture forming in your mind of the cuts you will make, the angle of the adze, the depth of the notch, the direction of the fall. You know that the trunk must come down on the side that faces away from the swamp, where the ground is firm enough to support it, and where you will have room to strip the bark and rasp the pith without working in water up to your ankles. The palm is heavy with stored starch, heavier than it looks, and you have felled enough trees in your life to understand that once it begins to lean there will be no stopping it. So the cuts must be placed with care, the angle judged exactly, the pace kept steady and slow, so that nothing is rushed and nothing is left to chance. The starch itself is the reason for all of this work, and as you sit in the quiet of the swamp, you think about what lies inside the trunk, hidden beneath the bark and the fibrous outer layers. The pith is white and spongy, and each of its cells is packed with tiny granules of pure carbohydrate, a store of energy that the palm has built up over the long years of its growth. Season after season of sunlight captured by the fronds and converted into sugar and then into starch and then deposited in the trunk's core. When you rasp the pith and wash it with water, those granules will separate and sink and dry into a fine white powder that can be mixed with water and cooked into a bland, nourishing porridge that has fed the people of these islands for as long as anyone can remember. Some of that flour will stay in the village, shared among the families who have helped with the work, or who will help with the next palm, or the one after that, and some will be packed into cotton sacks and weighed and marked for the Dutch traders who arrive by sea in their tall ships, paying in cloth and iron tools and copper wire for the sago that they will carry to other islands, other ports, other mouths hungry for starch that does not spoil in the tropical heat. This single tree will provide a great deal of flour, enough to fill many sacks, enough to make many meals, enough to justify the long day of labor that stretches out ahead of you. You think about this without any particular feeling of pride or ownership, because the palm is not truly yours in the way that a tool or a house is yours. It is more accurate to say that you and the palm have entered into a relationship, that you have watched it and tended the ground around it and waited for the right moment, and now the right moment has come, and you will do what you have done many times before and will do many times again. The thought is calming in its simplicity, a quiet certainty that rests in your mind like the moss rests on the fallen log. The sun climbs higher, and the quality of the light changes, the pale gold of early morning giving way to a whiter, more direct brilliance that finds its way through gaps in the canopy and falls onto the swamp in bright patches that steam slightly where they touch the cool water. The mist has gone entirely now, burned off by the heat, and the air is clear all the way to the forest wall on the far side of the swamp, where you can see the individual leaves on the trees, the hanging vines, the occasional flash of a bird's wing. The warmth is pleasant on your shoulders, a slow penetrating heat that loosens the muscles you will need for the felling, and you feel your body growing ready for the work, the way the morning always prepares you. The light and the air and the sounds working together to bring you to a state of calm alertness. You stand up from the log and brush a few strands of moss from your clothing, then walk back to the sago palm and stand close to the trunk, your toes touching one of the root buttresses. From this close, the tree seems even larger, its bulk filling your vision, and you can smell it now, a faint, dry scent of wood and fibre and something else, something slightly sweet, which is the starch itself, detectable if you know what to look for, a promise of what lies within. You run your hand over the bark one more time, tracing a vertical crack from its base up as high as you can reach, feeling the texture change from rough to smoother as you go. And then you lower your arm and turn away, walking back to the tools with the same slow, measured steps that have carried you through every part of this morning. You pick up the adze and test its edge with your thumb, the blade biting just enough to remind you that it is sharp, and then you look at the spot on the trunk where you will make the first cut. A place about the height of your knee from the ground, on the side that faces away from the swamp. The bark there is thick and unbroken, and you will need to chip through it gradually, widening the notch with each successive stroke, letting the weight of the iron head do most of the work while your arms guide it along the correct path. There is no need to hurry. The sun will stay in the sky for many more hours, and the palm has stood here for 15 years and will stand for a few minutes more, and everything will happen in its own time. Exactly as it should. You take up the iron adze and step toward the base of the trunk, positioning yourself on the side that faces away from the swamp, where the ground rises slightly into a low, dry hummock, tufted with wiry grass. The tool feels solid in your hands, its wooden handle worn smooth by the grip of countless days, its curved blade heavy with the weight that will do most of the work if you let it fall naturally, guiding rather than forcing each stroke. You stand with your feet planted a shoulder's width apart, the left foot slightly forward, and you raise the adze to the height of your chest, feeling the pull of the muscles across your back and shoulders as the blade catches the morning light for an instant before you bring it down in a smooth arc that ends with a low, solid thock against the bark. The sound is absorbed immediately by the damp air and the soft ground, leaving behind only a small pale gash in the outer layer of the trunk, a notch no wider than your thumb and no deeper than the thickness of the bark itself. You pause and inspect the cut, running your finger over the fresh wound to feel the fibrous texture of the exposed tissue, which is stringy and pale tan, darker than the pith that lies deeper within. The bark is split cleanly, and a few small fragments have fallen to the ground at your feet, mixing with the leaf litter. You raise the adze again and bring it down a second time, aiming for the same spot, and the notch widens by another sliver, the blade biting a little deeper now that the hard outer shell has been breached. The rhythm begins to establish itself in those first few minutes. Raise, swing, thock, pause, inspect, adjust, raise again. There is no hurry in any part of the motion, and your breathing settles into a deep, steady pattern that matches the pace of the work, each exhale coming as the adze strikes the wood. You work the notch from the center outward, widening it into a horizontal groove that follows the slight curve of the trunk's circumference. The blade of the adze is sharp but not razor-edged. It is designed to chip and scrape rather than slice, and with each stroke you feel the iron bite into the fibers and then pull free with a faint tearing sound. Chips of bark and outer wood accumulate around your feet, pale on one side where the inner tissue shows and dark and rough on the other where the outer bark clings. You pause from time to time to kick these chips aside with the edge of your foot, clearing the ground so that your footing remains sure, and then you resume the steady rhythm of the swing. The morning passes without any marker other than the movement of the sun, which climbs higher and grows warmer on the back of your neck and shoulders. You pause to drink from the gourd, the water now tepid but still refreshing, and you pour a little over the back of your hand to cool the skin before picking up the adze once more. The notch is deeper now, a groove that reaches into the dense, fibrous wood beneath the bark, and you can see the first glimmers of the white pith, pale as fresh coconut meat, peeking through the torn fibers at the deepest point of the cut. This glimpse of the starch you seek is satisfying in a quiet way, a confirmation that the tree is as full as you had hoped, but you do not linger over it, returning instead to the task with the same steady pace. The sound of the adze changes as you cut deeper, shifting from a dull thok to a sharper chink, the wood growing harder and more resistant the further you penetrate. You adjust the angle of your swing accordingly, lowering the arc so that the blade strikes at a flatter angle, chipping away thin slices rather than trying to bite deeply with each stroke. Your arms begin to feel the work now, a low, warm ache that spreads from your wrists to your elbows and up into your shoulders. But it is a familiar sensation, not a pain, and you welcome it as a sign that the day is progressing as it should. You switch hands from time to time, gripping the adze with your left hand forward and your right hand back, then reversing the hold, balancing the effort across both sides of your body so that no single muscle group grows too tired. You step back from the trunk and assess the notch, which now extends a hand's breadth into the wood and spans nearly a third of the trunk's width. The groove is clean and even, its top and bottom edges parallel, its inner surface rough with the torn fibers that the adze has left behind. You kneel in front of the cut and run your hand along its inner face, feeling the ridges and hollows, the places where the blade has dug deeper and the places where the wood has resisted. The pith is more visible now, a broad band of creamy white that glistens slightly with trapped moisture, and you can smell it faintly, a mild, starchy scent like raw rice or green banana. You decide it is time to begin the second notch, the one that will meet the first from the opposite side and determine the direction of the fall. You stand and walk around the trunk, stepping over the root buttresses, and position yourself on the swamp-facing side, where the water laps quietly at the base of the tree and the ground is softer underfoot. You work more carefully here, aware that your footing is less certain, and you begin a new groove at the same height as the first, matching its level by eye and by the feel of the adze against the bark. The work is slower on this side because you must pause more often to adjust your stance, shifting your weight when the mud threatens to pull at your sandals, but the rhythm remains essentially the same: raise, swing, thok, pause, raise again. From the swamp side, the world looks different, the view opening out across the dark water toward the distant wall of trees that marks the far edge of the marsh. A small turtle basks on a half-submerged log some distance away, its shell dark and glistening, its head extended toward the sun, and you notice it without interrupting your work, the image simply registering as part of the background of the day. A dragonfly hovers near your shoulder for a moment, its wings a blur of transparent motion, and then it darts off across the water, and you continue swinging the adze without having paused. The second notch grows deeper, and you can feel the tree begin to respond to the work, a subtle change in the way the trunk vibrates when the adze strikes, as if the wood is becoming less solid, more hollow, the immense column of fibre and pith now balanced on a narrowing bridge of uncut wood at its center. You do not hurry, but you recognize this phase of the work and know that the moment of falling is approaching, not imminent, but inevitable, and you adjust your movements accordingly, making each stroke more deliberate, checking the angle of the notch after every few swings to ensure that the tree will fall toward the dry ground and not into the swamp. You pause to rest, sitting on the fallen log and drinking more water, your breathing deep and slow. The sun is high now, the heat pressing down through the canopy in thick, golden columns, and the swamp is alive with the sounds of midday, the drone of cicadas that rises and falls in waves, the distant splash of something moving through the water, the soft rustle of a palm frond as a breeze passes high overhead. You eat a few mouthfuls of the cold rice, chewing slowly and watching the turtle on its log, which has not moved at all. And then you wrap the remainder of the rice back in its banana leaf and return to the tree. You work now on widening both notches, chipping away the wood between them so that the bridge grows thinner with each pass of the adze. The cuts on both sides are clean and aligned, and you step back frequently to check the line of the trunk, looking up along its length to see if there is any lean, any sign that the weight is beginning to shift. For a long time the tree remains perfectly upright, and you continue chipping, the pile of wood fragments growing at the base on both sides, the notches deepening into a wide, continuous groove that now reaches more than halfway through the trunk. Then you feel it, a faint vibration through the handle of the adze that is different from the normal impact, a tremor that runs up your arms and tells you the tree has begun to sense its own weight. You stop immediately and look up, and you see the very top of the crown sway slightly, the fronds trembling against the sky, though there is no wind at ground level. The sound that follows is low and deep, a creaking that seems to come from the heart of the wood itself, a long, groaning note that rises in pitch so slowly you are not sure at first that you are hearing it at all. The creaking continues, and the swaying at the top becomes more pronounced, the fronds dipping and rising like the arms of a slow dancer. You step back from the trunk, moving to a safe distance on the dry ground side, and you stand and watch as the palm begins its long, slow descent. The creaking grows louder, a sound like the stretching of 1,000 fibers all at once, and the trunk leans gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, then more visibly, the notch closing on the swamp side and opening wider on the opposite side as the weight of the crown pulls the tree toward the earth. The fronds sweep downward through the air with a rushing sound, a sigh of green leaves that grows louder as the tree picks up speed, and then the trunk strikes the ground with a deep, muffled thud that you feel through the soles of your feet more than you hear it. A single, low impact that shakes the ground once and then is gone. The forest falls silent in the aftermath. Even the cicadas pause, as if startled, and for a few long seconds there is no sound at all except the settling of the fallen fronds, the rustle of leaves finding their new positions on the forest floor. Then the sounds return gradually. A bird calls tentatively, a frog plops somewhere in the swamp, the cicadas start up again, and the world resumes its quiet hum. You stand where you are for a time, breathing evenly, letting your heart rate slow back to its resting pace, and you look at the fallen palm stretched out before you on the damp earth, its full length, now horizontal, its crown resting in a tangle of crushed sedges at the edge of the water. You walk slowly along the length of the fallen trunk, inspecting it from base to crown. The trunk is intact, no splits or cracks along its length, which means the starch inside has not been contaminated by mud or water. The crown lies partly in the swamp, but the main length of the trunk is on dry ground, exactly where you had planned for it to fall, and there is plenty of room around it to work. You run your hand along the bark, which feels different now that the tree is horizontal, the texture the same, but the orientation changed, the top side warm from the sun, and the underside cool and damp where it presses into the soil. You return to the log where your tools wait and sit down heavily, the tiredness in your arms and shoulders settling into a warm, pleasant ache. You drink deeply from the gourd, finishing the last of the water, and then you sit quietly for a while, looking at the fallen tree, and thinking about the next stage of the work. The felling is complete, and the pith is now accessible, waiting to be exposed and rasped and washed. But that work belongs to the afternoon, and the afternoon has not yet begun. For now you rest, your hands loose on your knees, the sun moving slowly across the sky, the swamp humming its endless, quiet song around you. With the great trunk now lying horizontal on the soft ground, you take a moment to let the quiet settle around you. The sound of the fall has faded completely, and the swamp has returned to its steady midday hum, the cicadas and the frogs and the distant birds weaving their threads back into the fabric of the afternoon. You stand beside the felled palm and look along its length, the bark grey and rough in the sunlight, the root mass at the base still partly embedded in the torn earth from which it was levered, the crown of fronds resting in a tangle at the edge of the water. The trunk is long and straight and solid, its surface marked with the spiral pattern of old leaf bases that you noticed when it was standing, and now those same ridges run horizontally before you, a map of the tree's growth written in fibre and time. You walk slowly from the base to the crown, counting your steps, feeling the slight give of the ground with each footfall. The bark feels different now that the tree is down. Warmer on the sun-facing side where the light has been beating directly since the moment of felling, cooler and slightly damp on the underside that presses into the soil. You kneel at several points along the trunk and press your palm against the rough surface, testing the solidity, checking for any cracks or splits that might have formed during the fall, but the trunk is sound, the pith within protected by the thick, fibrous jacket that you are about to remove. Satisfied, you return to the base, where your tools lie waiting in their careful arrangement beside the fallen log. You pick up the iron anzi and turn it over in your hands, wiping the blade with a scrap of cloth to remove any fragments of wood and mud that might have clung to it during the felling. The edge is still sharp, and you run your thumb lightly along its curve, not to test the bite, but simply to feel the familiar shape of the metal, cool and smooth beneath the fine layer of oil that protects it from rust. You set the adze down again and take up the wooden mallet, a dense block of ironwood that fits comfortably into your palm, its head dark with age and polished by the grip of many seasons. This tool you will use to loosen sections of bark that prove too tough for the adze alone, tapping the blade deeper when the fibers resist. You position yourself at the base of the trunk, standing on the side that faces away from the swamp, so that the light falls over your shoulder and illuminates the bark clearly. The root mass is a complicated tangle of woody buttresses and pale severed roots that still drip a little watery sap, and you work around it carefully, placing your feet on the firmest patches of ground. You raise the adze and begin the first cut, not a deep swing like those you used for felling, but a shallow, controlled stroke that bites into the outer bark just enough to split it along the grain. The sound is a crisp schnick, lighter than the felling blows, and a thin strip of bark curls away from the wood beneath, pale brown on its inner face and rough and grey on the outer. You work the adze along the length of the trunk, cutting a straight line from the base toward the crown, a groove that follows the natural grain of the fibers and splits the outer bark open like the seam of a garment. The cut is not deep. It penetrates only through the hard, corky outer layer, leaving the paler, stringier inner bark still attached to the pith. Once the line is established, you go back to the beginning and cut another line parallel to the first, a hand's breadth away, creating a long narrow strip that you can then peel backward with the help of the adze blade inserted beneath its edge. The bark lifts with a soft tearing sound, the fibers stretching and snapping as they separate from the trunk, and you pull the strip free, laying it on the ground beside you, where it will later be gathered and carried back to the village for use as flooring or fuel. You repeat the process, cutting a second strip alongside the first, then a third, each one the same width and the same length. The adze moving in the same steady rhythm as the morning's work, but lighter now, more delicate, a task of peeling rather than chopping. The exposed inner bark comes into view, a layer of dense, fibrous tissue, the color of unbleached linen, rough to the touch but softer than the outer shell. Where the strips have been removed, the trunk looks paler, almost luminous against the surrounding grey, and you run your hand over the exposed surface, feeling the stringy texture of the fibers and the slight dampness that clings to them. You move slowly along the length of the trunk, working from the base toward the crown, stripping the bark in sections. Some parts come away easily, lifting in long, continuous ribbons when you apply the adze at the right angle, while others are tougher, the fibers clinging stubbornly to the wood beneath, and at these points you use the mallet to tap the adze blade gently, driving it under the bark with a series of soft, rhythmic knocks that sound like a distant woodpecker. The mallet is heavy, but you wield it with a light touch, using just enough force to persuade the bark to release its grip without damaging the pith that lies only a short distance deeper. The pile of discarded bark grows steadily beside you, a heap of grey and brown strips that curl and twist as they dry in the sun. Beneath the outer and inner bark lies the pith itself, and as you remove more of the covering layers, glimpses of it begin to appear. A stark white that catches the light and seems almost to glow, so different from the dark greens and browns of the swamp that it takes your eyes a moment to adjust. The pith is soft and spongy to the touch, and you press your thumb into it experimentally, feeling it compress and then spring back slightly when you release the pressure. A faint, starchy scent rises from the depression, clean and mild, like the smell of raw rice flour or the inside of a freshly split coconut. The work continues through the early afternoon, the sun shifting its position in the sky and the shadows of the surrounding palms growing slowly longer. You pause often to rest, straightening your back and rolling your shoulders, drinking water from the gourd that you refilled at the stream during a brief walk away from the swamp. The water is cooler than the air around you, and it washes the taste of dust and fibre from your mouth, leaving behind a clean, neutral freshness that is pleasant in the heat. You eat a few more mouthfuls of the cold rice, chewing each bite thoroughly while you sit on the fallen log and look at the half-stripped trunk. The white pith, gleaming in the afternoon light, like a long, pale bone laid out on the forest floor. When you return to the work, you switch to the other side of the trunk, walking around the root mass to stand on the swamp-facing side where the ground is wetter and the light is dimmer, filtered through the fronds of the other palms that lean overhead. The bark on this side is slightly more difficult to remove because it has been pressed into the damp soil and has absorbed some of the moisture, making it softer and more likely to tear in short pieces rather than long strips. You adjust your technique accordingly, making shorter cuts and using the mallet more frequently, tapping the adze through the sodden outer bark and peeling it away in hand-sized patches that you toss onto the growing pile behind you. As the bark comes away, more of the pith is revealed, and you can see the full thickness of the starchy layer that fills the interior of the trunk. The pith is not uniform. Near the base it is thickest, a broad cylinder of pure white that occupies most of the trunk's diameter, while further toward the crown it narrows gradually as the core of the tree tapers. The dividing line between pith and inner bark is sharp and clear, the dense, stringy fibers of the bark giving way abruptly to the soft, mealy whiteness within, a transition as distinct as the boundary between sea and shore. You run your finger along this boundary at one point, tracing the line where the two tissues meet, and you marvel, without any urgency, at the way the tree has organized itself, the structural fibers on the outside and the stored food on the inside, each layer serving its purpose in the life of the palm. Now that the pith is fully exposed along most of the trunk's length, you set down the adze and mallet and take a moment to examine your work. The stripped trunk looks almost naked, its white interior gleaming in the sun, and you can see the faint, concentric rings that mark the years of growth, subtle variations in the density of the starch that correspond to wet seasons and dry seasons, times of plenty and times of scarcity. You place both hands on the pith and press down, feeling the slight give of the spongy material, the way it yields to pressure and then rebounds, and you know that the starch within is good, firm and full and ready to be rasped. Before you begin the rasping, you gather the discarded bark into neat bundles, tying each one with a length of the same bark cord that you carry in your basket. The bundles are light, and you stack them to one side where they will dry further in the sun and become even lighter, easy to carry back to the village when the day's work is done. The bark will be useful. The outer layers can be burned as fuel in the cooking fires, their oily fibers producing a hot, steady flame, while the inner layers can be woven into rough mats or used as temporary flooring in the huts. Nothing is wasted, and you handle each strip with the same quiet care that you give to the pith itself, acknowledging the value of every part of the tree. The afternoon wears on, and the heat reaches its peak, the air thick and heavy and almost motionless. You retreat to the shade of the fallen log and sit down heavily, your legs crossed and your hands loose on your knees, letting the tiredness drain from your muscles into the ground. The swamp around you is quiet now, even the cicadas having paused in their droning, and the only sounds are the occasional plop of a frog entering the water and the distant murmur of the stream that you crossed earlier in the day. You close your eyes for a time, not sleeping but resting, the darkness behind your eyelids a welcome relief from the bright glare of the sun on the white pith. When you open your eyes again, the light has changed, the harsh whiteness of midday fading into the softer gold of late afternoon. You stand and stretch, your arms reaching overhead and your spine lengthening with a series of small, satisfying pops. You walk back to the stripped trunk and run your hand over the pith one more time, feeling its cool, damp surface, its texture like a very firm, fine-grained sponge. The work of stripping is complete, and now the pith lies open and vulnerable to the air, waiting to be transformed. You pick up the rasping board from where it leans against the log, its surface embedded with rows of tiny, sharp stone chips that glitter like mica in the angled light, and you set it on the ground beside the trunk, ready for the next stage of the process. But that work belongs to another chapter of the day, and for now you pause, standing quietly beside the fallen palm and looking out across the swamp toward the distant forest wall. The white egret has returned to its station in the shallows, as still as a carving, and the turtle still basks on its half-submerged log. And the same dragonfly, with wings of electric blue, patrols the air above the water in a zigzag path that seems to have no beginning and no end. You breathe the warm, thick air and feel the deep satisfaction of a task completed. The stripped trunk a record of your labor, the pile of bark a promise of future warmth, the pith a storehouse of nourishment that will soon be freed. The day continues, slow and unhurried, and you are perfectly content to let it unfold at its own measured pace. You take up the rasping board from where it leans against the fallen log, its weight familiar in your hands, a flat plank of light wood into which rows of tiny stone chips have been set with resin and patience. The board is as long as your arm from elbow to fingertip, its upper surface studded with jagged fragments of quartz and chur that glitter dully in the afternoon light, each one positioned so that its sharpest edge faces outward. You run your palm over the stones without pressing down, feeling their roughness skate across your skin, a texture like coarse coral or the tongue of a cat. The underside of the board is smooth from years of handling, polished to a soft sheen by the oils of your hands, and you grip it comfortably with both sets of fingers curling around the edges, your thumbs resting on the top near the first row of stone teeth. You position yourself beside the stripped trunk, kneeling on a folded mat of woven pandanus leaves that you have spread on the ground to protect your knees from the damp soil. The white pith stretches before you, its surface stark against the dark greens and browns of the swamp, and you lean forward to inspect it closely, noting the faint concentric rings that mark the years of growth, the tiny pores that dot the surface like pinpricks. The pith is cool and slightly damp to the touch, and when you press your thumb into it, a shallow depression remains, filling slowly with moisture that beads up from the spongy tissue. The scent of raw starch rises to meet you, clean and mild, like the smell of a freshly cut potato or the inside of a young coconut. You set the rasping board against the pith at the base of the trunk, pressing it firmly so that the stone teeth bite into the white surface. Then you push forward, sliding the board along the length of the trunk with a steady, even pressure that comes from your shoulders and upper arms rather than your wrists. The sound that follows is a soft, continuous grating, a hesh sound like rain on a thatch roof or the hiss of waves receding over fine sand. Behind the board, in the path that the stone teeth have carved, the pith transforms from a solid, compact mass into a loose heap of pale, fluffy fibre that looks exactly like fresh snow or the grated meat of a mature coconut. The fibres are thin and short and damp, and they cling together in clumps that fall away from the trunk and settle onto the woven mat you have placed to catch them. You pull the board back toward you, dragging it lightly over the same path to knock loose any fibres still clinging to the teeth, and then you push forward again, extending the rasped area a little further along the trunk. The motion settles into a rhythm that is slower than the felling and lighter than the stripping, a gentle, repetitive cycle of push and pull, each forward stroke producing more of the soft grating sound and more of the fluffy white fibre, each backward stroke clearing the board and preparing it for the next pass. Your arms move with a steadiness that comes from years of practice, the muscles remembering the exact angle and pressure required to rasp the pith efficiently without gouging too deeply or missing any patches. You work a section at a time, starting at the base and moving gradually toward the crown, rasping the pith down to a depth of about 2 finger joints before shifting your position and beginning again on the next untouched area. The pile of fibre on the mat grows slowly, its surface shifting and settling with each new addition, and you pause from time to time to gather it into a neater mound with your hands, patting it gently so that it does not spill onto the bare ground. The fibre is soft and cool, and it clings to your fingers in small, damp clumps that you brush back onto the pile, watching them dissolve into the larger mass. The afternoon light continues its slow shift across the clearing, the sun sliding lower and the shadows of the surrounding palms stretching longer, their dark fingers reaching across the swamp water and across the fallen trunk. The heat of midday has given way to a gentler warmth, the air still heavy but no longer oppressive, and a faint breeze stirs through the high fronds above, making them rustle with a sound like the turning of many pages. You work within this quiet theatre of light and shadow, your kneeling figure casting a long distorted silhouette that moves in time with the rasping board, advancing and retreating, advancing and retreating, advancing and retreating. As you rasp, you encounter variations in the pith, subtle differences in density and texture that correspond to the tree's history. Near the base, where the starch is most concentrated, the pith is firm and yields reluctantly, the stone teeth biting deeply and producing a fibre that is thick and almost crumbly. Further up the trunk, the pith becomes slightly softer, the fibre finer and fluffier, and the rasping board glides through it with less resistance, the grating sound higher in pitch and more delicate. These changes are familiar to you, and you adjust your pressure accordingly, leaning harder on the board where the pith is dense and lightening your touch where it is soft, maintaining the same steady rhythm regardless of the material's response. You pause from time to time to clear the stone teeth, which can become clogged with compacted fibre that reduces their effectiveness. You do this by tapping the board gently against the side of the trunk, letting the loosened fibre fall onto the mat, or by picking at the spaces between the stones with a small pointed stick that you keep in your basket for this purpose. The cleaning is quick and methodical, a brief interruption in the rhythm that feels natural rather than disruptive, and you soon resume the steady push and pull of the rasping. The pile of rasping fibre grows larger, a soft, white mound that rises from the mat like a small pillow. Its surface stirs in the faint breeze, tiny fibres lifting and drifting a short distance before settling again, and the sweet, starchy scent is stronger now, filling the air around you and mixing with the earthy smell of the swamp. You notice a small butterfly with pale wings landing on the edge of the pile, its proboscis uncurling to taste the damp fibre, and you pause for a moment to watch it, the board resting motionless in your hands. Then the butterfly lifts away, its wings catching a shaft of sunlight as it flutters toward the water, and you return to the rasping without having lost a single beat of the rhythm. Your body settles into the work as it has done at every stage of the day, your mind growing quiet and still, emptied of anything except the immediate sensations of the task, the rough grip of the board, the cool dampness of the fibre, the soft grating sound, the play of light on the pith. There is no need to think about what comes next or what came before. There is only the present moment, the sliding motion, the pile growing, the sun moving. This is the heart of the work, the point where labor becomes a form of meditation, and you inhabit it fully, your breathing slow and deep, your heart beating in time with the push and pull of the board. When you have rasped a section of the trunk down to the point where the pith thins and the fibrous core begins to show through, you stop and shift your position, moving further along the trunk and spreading the mat beneath the next untouched area. You kneel again, settle your weight, and begin the rasping anew, the first push of the board against the fresh pith producing that same soft shh sound that you have been hearing for the better part of an hour. The sound is so constant now that it has become a kind of silence in itself, a background hum that your ears have stopped registering as separate from the ambient noise of the swamp, and you would notice its absence more than its presence. The trunk is long, and the work of rasping it entirely will take the remainder of the afternoon and perhaps a portion of the early evening. But you are not measuring the time in hours or minutes. You measure it instead in the length of pith that remains untouched, the shrinking band of white that recedes before the advancing board, the growing pile of fibre that will soon be ready for washing. Each pass of the rasp brings that moment closer, but each pass is also complete in itself, a small finished action that requires nothing more than your attention and your steady hands. You pause to drink water, the gourd now less than half full and the liquid warm from the afternoon heat, and you eat the last of the cold rice, unwrapping the banana leaf and folding it back carefully so that none of the grains spill. The rice is slightly sticky now, having absorbed the final traces of moisture from the leaf, and you eat it slowly, savoring the mild flavor and the way it fills your stomach with a gentle, solid warmth. You watch the swamp while you eat, noticing how the light has deepened into a richer gold, how the shadows have taken on a bluish tinge, how the white egret has finally left its station and flown off toward the forest on slow, deliberate wing beats. After the meal, you return to the rasping with renewed energy, your arms finding their rhythm again, as if they had never left it. You work your way steadily toward the crown, where the trunk tapers and the pith becomes thinner and more fibrous, interwoven with the stringy vascular bundles that carried water and nutrients up the tree during its lifetime. Here the rasping requires more care, the stone teeth catching on the tougher fibers and threatening to tear them out in clumps, rather than grating them into the fine, fluffy consistency you need. You slow your pace and lighten your pressure, working the board in shorter, more controlled strokes that shave the pith away in thin layers, gradually reducing the white material to the same soft fiber that has filled the mat below. The crown itself, where the trunk divides into the bases of the fronds, contains relatively little starch, and you work it only briefly, rasping away the accessible pith and then leaving the fibrous core to be discarded or used for other purposes. You sit back on your heels and survey the trunk, which is now reduced from its original thickness to a much narrower core, its surface rough and stringy where the pith has been removed, its color a pale tan rather than the bright white of the fresh interior. The trunk looks smaller somehow, diminished but not destroyed, its substance transferred into the great pile of fiber that awaits the next stage of the process. You set the rasping board aside, leaning it against the log with the stone teeth facing inward, so that they will not be dulled by contact with anything hard, and you turn your attention to the pile of fiber. It is a substantial mound now, as high as your knees at its peak and spreading across the entire surface of the mat, a soft, white, fragrant mass that seems to breathe with the faint stirring of the air. You kneel beside it and plunge your hands into its cool depths, lifting handfuls and letting them fall back, watching the way the fibers separate and drift, light as feathers, catching the golden light. The starch is still trapped within these fibers, locked inside the tiny cells that your rasping has broken open, and the next task will be to wash it free with water from the stream. But that task belongs to another part of the day, and for now you are content to sit beside the pile and feel the deep, quiet satisfaction of work that has been done well. You gather the edges of the mat and fold them up around the fiber, creating a loose bundle that you tie with a length of bark cord, not tightly but securely enough that the breeze will not scatter your work before you are ready to move it to the washing platform. The bundle is light despite its size, the fiber full of air as much as starch, and you lift it easily, setting it to one side in the shade where it will remain cool and damp. Then you walk back to the fallen log and sit down heavily, your body tired in a pleasant, comfortable way, the tiredness of muscles that have been used steadily and well. The afternoon is drawing toward evening now, the sun a warm orange disk just above the tree line, the sky above it shading from pale blue to a soft lavender at the zenith. The swamp is quiet, the cicadas having fallen silent, the frogs just beginning their evening chorus with a few tentative calls that will grow louder as the light fades. You sit on the log and listen to these sounds, the first tentative croaks, and the rustle of palm fronds and the distant murmur of the stream, and you feel the day settling around you like a blanket, each moment flowing into the next without any sharp edges or sudden changes. The work of rasping is done, and the fiber awaits the water, and you are content to let the evening come at its own pace, bringing with it the next quiet chapter of the Sago maker's day. You kneel beside the large bundle of rasped fiber and loosen the bark cord that holds the mat closed, letting the edges fall open so that the pale mound is exposed once more to the warm afternoon air. The fiber has settled during the short time it sat in the shade, its bulk compressing slightly under its own weight, and you can see the faint wisps of steam rising from its surface where the inner warmth of the pith meets the cooling air. You reach into the pile with both hands and lift a double handful, feeling the soft, damp strands slip between your fingers, cool and light and faintly sticky with the starch that still clings to the broken cell walls. The scent of fresh sago rises around you, mild and clean, carrying with it the promise of the fine white flour that will emerge after the washing. You begin dividing the fiber into smaller portions, each one roughly the size of a household cooking pot when compressed, a size that will fit comfortably into the carrying basket without spilling or becoming too heavy for the short walk to the stream. You work methodically, grabbing a mass of fiber and pressing it together, shaping it into a loose ball that holds its form just long enough to be tied before it relaxes and expands again. From the coil of bark rope that has waited beside you all day, You cut several shorter lengths, each one long enough to wrap twice around a bundle and knot securely. The fibers of the rope soft and pliable from the humidity, easy to work with and gentle on your hands. You take the first portion of fiber and wrap it with a length of bark cord, pulling the knot tight until the bundle is compact but not crushed, the cord biting just enough into the springy mass to hold everything in place. You set the finished bundle aside and reach for the next portion, repeating the same motions exactly. Gather, shape, wrap, pull, knot, set aside. The repetition is soothing rather than tedious, each small task flowing into the next without any need for conscious thought, your hands moving as if they belong to someone else, while your mind drifts across the quiet landscape of the afternoon. The pile of loose fiber slowly transforms into a neat row of tied bundles, 5 of them in total, each one a pale, fragrant sphere that looks something like an oversized dumpling waiting to be steamed. When all the fiber is bundled, you survey the row with a quiet sense of order restored, the chaos of the loose pile now tamed into manageable units that can be transported one by one along the path to the washing platform. You stand and stretch your back, your spine lengthening with a soft series of pops, and then you walk over to where the carrying basket waits upside down on its tuft of sedge. You turn it right side up and shake out a few tiny insects that have taken shelter inside, watching them scurry away into the grass, and then you lift the basket and settle it onto your back, adjusting the straps made of softened bark fiber until they sit comfortably across your shoulders and chest, the weight of the empty basket barely noticeable. You return to the row of bundles and lift the first one, cradling it in your arms like a sleeping infant before hoisting it over your shoulder and lowering it into the basket. The bundle fits neatly inside, filling about half the available space, and you go back for the second bundle, loading it on top of the first and pressing down gently to settle the contents. The basket is full now, the 2 bundles rising slightly above the rim, and you tug the edges of the weave to make sure everything is secure before you begin the walk. The weight on your back is moderate, perhaps the same as a sack of rice, and you adjust your posture to accommodate it, leaning forward just enough to balance the load over your hips. You set off along the path that leads from the fallen palm toward the stream, the same path you walked earlier in the day, but reversed now, the light different and the air warmer, the ground drier underfoot after hours of sun. Your bare feet find the familiar dips and rises automatically, and the strap of the water gourd bumps against your hip with each step, a small rhythmic percussion that soon fades from your awareness. The forest around you is quiet in the late afternoon, the birds having retired to their roosts and the insects yet to begin their evening chorus. So the only sounds are your own footsteps, the soft creak of the basket straps, and the steady pull of your breathing in the warm, still air. The path winds through the same stretch of secondary forest you crossed this morning, but the light now slants in from the west, low and golden, filtering through the leaves and casting long shadows that stretch ahead of you, like dark guides pointing the way. The ferns that brushed your shins in the morning are now dry and slightly wilted, their fronds drooping in the heat, and the mud between the hummocks has developed a thin crust that cracks softly under your weight. You notice these small differences without pausing to examine them, absorbing the changed landscape through your senses as you walk, the way the air smells less of mist and more of warm earth, the way the light catches the strands of spider silk that span the gaps between branches. You reach the stream sooner than you expect, the walk having compressed in your mind because it is so familiar, and you stop on the near bank to look at the water before crossing. The stream is the same as it was this morning, clear and slow and patient, sliding over its bed of grey and brown pebbles with a soft liquid murmur that fills the air like a whispered conversation. The log bridge still spans the water, its surface dry and warm now after the day's sun, and you cross it carefully, balancing the weight of the basket on your back, looking down at the tiny fish that still dart in the shallows, and the water striders that skate across the surface on legs that dimple the water without breaking it. On the far bank, the path divides, the left fork leading back toward the village and the right fork heading to the washing platform. A short distance downstream where the stream widens slightly, and a shallow channel has been dug to divert a portion of the flow. You take the right fork and follow it along the bank, the sound of water growing louder as you approach, not the soft murmur of the stream itself, but a brighter, more musical sound. the splash and gurgle of water tumbling over a small drop and into the trough that feeds the platform. The washing platform comes into view through a screen of tall reeds, a simple structure built of split bamboo lashed together with rattan cords, raised on stilts above a shallow trough lined with clay. The platform is just large enough for one person to stand on comfortably, its surface made of closely spaced bamboo slats that allow water to drain through, and at one end a narrow channel diverts a steady flow of clear water from the stream, directing it across the platform and into the trough below. The water in the channel moves with a constant, unhurried purpose, catching the slanting afternoon light and throwing small reflections onto the underside of the overhanging leaves. The whole structure is old and weathered, the bamboo a soft silver grey, the rattan bindings darkened with age and moisture, but it is solid and well maintained, rebuilt whenever the rains weaken one part or another. You step onto the platform carefully, testing the bamboo slats with your weight before committing fully, and the structure gives a slight, familiar creak and then settles, as steady as the ground itself. You shrug off the carrying basket and set it down on the driest corner of the platform. Then untie the flap and lift out the first bundle of fibre. You hold it over the trough and cut the bark cord with a small knife you carry at your waist, a blade no longer than your finger, sharp enough to slice through the softened fibre in a single pass. The cord falls away and the bundle expands immediately, the compressed fibres springing back into their original fluffiness as you crumble the mass between your hands and let it fall into the trough below, in a soft, white shower. The fibre lands in the shallow water with a gentle plop, spreading out across the surface and beginning to soak up the moisture immediately, its colour darkening from bright white to pale cream. You watch it for a moment as it settles, the strands drifting apart and then regrouping, pulled by the slow current that moves through the trough, and then you turn back to the basket and lift out the second bundle. You repeat the same motions, hold it over the trough, cut the cord, crumble the mass, let it fall. The second bundle joins the first, and the fibre in the trough doubles in volume, a soft, floating mass that looks like a cloud reflected in the shallow water. With the basket now empty, you sling it back onto your shoulders and step off the platform, returning to the path that leads back to the fallen palm. The walk back is identical to the walk there, but reversed. The same trees, the same ferns, the same patches of mud with their thin crusts, the same golden light falling through the canopy. Your feet know the way so well that you do not have to guide them, and your mind is free to wander across the surface of the afternoon, touching lightly on small observations, the way a particular vine has grown since you passed it this morning, the way the shadow of a palm trunk has moved across the path, the way the air is beginning to cool just slightly at its edges, a hint of the evening that will soon arrive. You reach the fallen palm and the row of remaining bundles, 3 of them still waiting, pale and round against the dark green of the sedges. You load the basket again, 2 bundles this time, the same weight, the same slight compression of the straps against your shoulders, and you begin the second trip along the path. The walk feels shorter now, the familiarity of the route compressing the distance, and you find yourself at the log bridge almost before you realize you have left the swamp. The stream is unchanged, the water still sliding over its pebbles, the fish still darting, the water striders still skating, and you cross without pausing, your reflection a dark shape that moves across the surface and then disappears as you step onto the opposite bank. At the platform you empty the second load of bundles into the trough, the fresh fibre joining the mass that is already soaking there, the pile growing larger and more substantial. The water in the trough has turned slightly cloudy now, just a faint milkiness that drifts downstream and dissipates, and you know that some of the starch has already begun to release from the fibre even without kneading, the simple contact with water enough to start the process of separation. You leave the fibre to soak and turn back for the final trick, the basket light and empty on your back, your footsteps unhurried, the afternoon continuing its slow descent toward evening. The last bundle waits alone beside the fallen trunk, the smallest of the 5, containing the fibre from the thin end of the pith near the crown. You lift it and settle it into the basket, noticing how much lighter it is than the others, its mass less dense, its texture slightly coarser to the touch. Then you straighten up and take one last look at the fallen palm, its stripped trunk pale in the golden light, the discarded bark still stacked neatly to one side, the tools still arranged on the fallen log where you left them. Everything is in order. the site tidy and calm, and you will return later or tomorrow to collect the tools and the bark and carry them back to the village. For now, the work here is done. You walk the path for the third and final time. The sun now low enough that it glares directly into your eyes through gaps in the trees, forcing you to squint and look down at the ground. The shadows have grown long and deep, pooling in the hollows and stretching across the trail like dark water, and the air has taken on that particular stillness that comes just before dusk. The wind dropping away entirely, so that every leaf hangs motionless, and every sound carries further than it should. You hear a hornbill calling somewhere far off, its voice a series of deep, rhythmic hoots that roll across the forest like distant thunder. And you hear the stream before you see it, its murmur rising to meet you as you approach the final bend in the path. At the platform, you empty the last bundle into the trough, the fibers falling onto the soaked mass with a soft, wet sound, and you crumble them gently with your fingers to separate any clumps that have formed during the walk. Now all of the rasped pith is here, gathered in one place, a great mound of saturated fibre that fills the trough from side to side and rises above the waterline in a pale, spongy hill. The water from the diversion channel flows steadily into the trough, passing through the fibre and emerging on the far side with a slight cloudiness, carrying the first traces of freed starch downstream toward the settling area that you will prepare in due time. You step back from the trough and look around the platform, taking in the details of the scene. The worn bamboo slats underfoot, the water channel that trickles with a sound like a small, contented creature, the reeds that sway along the bank, the stream beyond that winds away into the darkening forest. The afternoon light has deepened into a rich, honeyed gold, and it catches the ripples in the trough, making them glitter with tiny sparks of white and yellow that dance and vanish and dance again. The everyday Hift insulation tricks, and everything is peaceful, everything is ready. You sit down on the edge of the platform, your legs dangling over the side, your feet almost touching the water that flows through the trough below. The tiredness in your body is a pleasant, settled weight, and you let it hold you there, motionless, watching the light play on the ripples and listening to the quiet music of the stream. The fibre waits in the trough, soaking and softening, and soon you will begin the work of kneading and washing to free the starch from its cells. But that work belongs to the next part of the day, the part that bridges afternoon and evening, and for now, there is only the golden light, the sound of water, and the slow, steady rhythm of your breathing in the cooling air. You lower yourself onto the washing platform and kneel on the split bamboo slats, your knees finding the familiar grooves worn smooth by many previous sessions of this same work. The trough before you is filled with the soaked sago fibre, a great pale mass that floats and drifts in the shallow water, its color now a soft cream rather than the stark white of fresh pith. The water from the diversion channel flows steadily into the upper end of the trough, spilling over a small lip of clay and spreading across the surface with a gentle glassy motion before it filters through the fibre and drains out the lower end through a narrow gap controlled by a simple sluice of flat stones. The sound of the water is constant and soft, a murmur of liquid in motion that forms a peaceful background to the task ahead. You reach into the trough and submerge both hands in the cool water, feeling the shock of the temperature after the warmth of the afternoon air, a pleasant awakening sensation that travels up your wrists and into your forearms. The fibre floats between your fingers, soft and spongy, and when you close your hands around a portion of it, the water squeezes out in a milky stream that clouds the area around your arms before drifting away with the current. This first cloudiness is a sign that the starch is already beginning to release, the tiny granules slipping from the broken cells and into the surrounding liquid, and you watch the white tendrils swirl and dissipate. Satisfied that the soaking has done its preparatory work, you begin to knead the fibre, pressing it between your palms and working it with a slow rhythmic compression that forces the starch grains from the fibrous matrix into the water. Your hands move independently of your thoughts, one pressing while the other gathers, then switching, a continuous cycle of squeeze and release, each cycle sending fresh plumes of white into the trough. The fibre is slippery under your fingers, the wet strands sliding over each other with a faint, almost musical squelch, and you work your way methodically through the mass from one end of the trough to the other. ensuring that every portion receives the same steady attention. The motion is not violent or hurried, it is more like a deep massage, a patient manipulation that persuades the starch to let go rather than forcing it. As you knead, the water in the trough becomes increasingly opaque, shifting from clear to cloudy to a dense, milky white that obscures your hands entirely so that you work by feel rather than sight. The starch grains suspended in the water are so fine that they move as a single liquid body, flowing with the gentle current toward the lower end of the trough, drawn by the pull of the sluice. You pause from time to time to push the floating fibre back into the deeper water, using a flat wooden paddle that rests on the edge of the platform, its surface smooth and darkened by countless immersions. The paddle slips into the water without resistance, and you guide the errant strands back into the main mass with a few easy strokes, then return it to its resting place and continue the kneading. The work settles into a rhythm that involves your whole upper body. Your shoulders rock slightly forward and back, your arms flex and extend, your fingers curl and uncurl, all moving in a slow, hypnotic sequence that feels less like labor and more like a form of quiet meditation. Your breathing deepens to match the pace, each exhale timed to the compression of your hands, each inhale to the release, and after a while you become aware of your own heartbeat, a steady, distant pulse that seems to synchronize with the soft splashing of the water. The world narrows to this small, damp universe, the platform and the trough and the milky water and the pale fibre and your own hands moving through it all with a sureness that requires no conscious direction. From time to time you pause to test the fibre, lifting a small handful from the water and squeezing it tightly, then examining the liquid that drips from your fist. At first, the drips are white and thick with starch, leaving a visible trail on your skin. But as the kneading progresses, the liquid runs clearer, the starch content diminishing with each successive test. You know from long experience exactly when the fibre has given up its store, the point at which further kneading would yield so little that it is no longer worth the effort, and you work each batch until you reach that point, then push the spent fibre to one side of the trough and gather a fresh portion into the center. The spent fibre, now mostly just cellulose and water, is lighter in color and texture than it was before, lacking the slight stickiness that the starch imparts. You lift it in wet, dripping armfuls and place it on a flat basket made of woven pandanus that you've positioned at the edge of the platform, its open weave allowing the water to drain freely back into the stream. The spent fibre will not be wasted. Once it is dried in the sun for a day or two, it can be used as a coarse padding for sleeping mats or mixed with mud to daub the walls of huts, its usefulness extending far beyond the extraction of the starch. You pile it carefully, patting it down so that it does not slide off the basket into the water, and then you turn back to the trough and the dwindling mass of unwashed fibre. The afternoon has continued its slow progress while you worked, and the light now streams through the trees at a low angle, catching the water in the diversion channel and turning it into a ribbon of molten gold. The reeds along the bank cast long, wavering shadows across the platform, their tips moving in a breeze that you cannot feel, but that must be stirring the higher air, and the first insects of evening have begun to appear, tiny midges that dance in the shafts of sunlight and then vanish as they pass into the shade. A frog has taken up a position somewhere near the sluice, its call a single low note repeated at irregular intervals, a sound like a small stone dropped into a deep well. You work through the remaining fibre with the same steady pace, your hands now thoroughly accustomed to the temperature of the water, the texture of the strands, the resistance of the starch. The milky water in the trough must be drained and replaced several times as you go, the accumulation of free starch becoming so dense that it begins to settle on the bottom and clog the flow. You manage this by opening the sluice a little wider for a few moments, allowing the thick white water to rush out into the secondary settling area downstream, a shallow, clay-lined basin where the starch will have a chance to sink and collect. Then you close the sluice partway again and let fresh water from the diversion channel refill the trough, the level rising slowly until it laps against the bamboo sides with a soft, clean sound. The fresh water is a shock of clarity after the milky opacity of the old, and for a few moments you can see your hands clearly through the ripples. The fibre, the stones on the bottom of the trough, the tiny water snails that cling to the bamboo supports, their shells no larger than a grain of rice. Then you resume kneading, and the water clouds again, but more slowly this time, the starch content of the fibre having been significantly reduced, so that the resulting mixture is a thin, translucent white rather than the dense opacity of before. You continue through this second washing, working the fibre thoroughly and then test it again, squeezing a handful and watching the drips, which now run almost clear, the last traces of starch so dilute that they are barely visible against your skin. You gather the final batch of spent fibre and add it to the pile on the draining basket, pressing it down with both hands to compact the mass. And then you sit back on your heels and survey the trough, which now contains only clean water and a few stray strands floating on the surface, drifting in lazy circles with the current. The washing is complete. Before you, in the shallow settling basin downstream, a dense layer of pure white starch is slowly accumulating on the bottom, the fine granules sinking through the still water with a patience that matches your own. You stand up carefully, your legs stiff from the long kneeling, and stretch your arms overhead, feeling the pull of the muscles across your back and shoulders, the pleasant ache of sustained effort. The platform creaks slightly under your shifting weight, and you step off onto the solid ground of the bank, walking a short distance downstream to inspect the settling basin. The basin is a simple rectangle dug into the clay soil, its sides smooth and its bottom flat, fed by the narrow channel that carries the overflow from the washing trough. The water within is perfectly still, now that the sluice has been closed, its surface a mirror that reflects the leaves overhead and the pale lavender of the evening sky. And beneath that glassy surface you can see the white layer of starch that has already begun to accumulate, a soft, feathery sediment that looks like the first snowfall of the season. You kneel at the edge of the basin and lower your hand into the water very slowly, careful not to disturb the settling process, your fingers entering the cool liquid and descending until they touch the layer of starch on the bottom. The sensation is unlike anything else. The starch is smooth and silky, compacted into a soft, dense mud that yields to the slightest pressure. And when you withdraw your hand, a thin coating of the white paste clings to your skin, drying quickly in the air to a fine, powdery film. You rub your thumb across it, feeling the extreme fineness of the particles, the way they slide against each other without any grittiness, and you know that the flour you produce from this starch will be of excellent quality, light and pure and capable of making a smooth, bland porridge. You walk back to the platform and gather your things, the water gourd now empty, the banana leaf that held your rice folded into a small square and tucked into the carrying basket, the basket itself slung over your shoulder once more. The pile of spent fibre on the draining rack will be left here overnight to release its excess moisture, and you will collect it tomorrow or the day after when it is light enough to carry easily. The tools at the fallen palm can also wait. You will fetch the adze and mallet and rasping board in the morning before the dew has dried. For now, the washing is done, the starch is settling, and the day has reached that quiet point where work gives way to rest, the slow transition from active labor to peaceful waiting. You sit down on the edge of the platform, your legs dangling over the side, and you watch the last light drained from the sky above the stream. The water in the diversion channel continues its quiet murmur, unchanged by the hour, and the settling basin holds its stillness like a held breath, the starch sinking layer by invisible layer. The air has cooled noticeably, the damp warmth of the afternoon replaced by a fresher, cleaner coolness that carries the first hint of night, and you pull your light shawl around your shoulders, a length of soft cotton cloth that you keep in the basket for exactly this purpose. The evening sounds are beginning to gather around you. The frog near the sluice has been joined by others, their calls overlapping in a slow, rolling chorus, and somewhere in the forest a night bird whistles a single, liquid note that hangs in the air and then fades. You remain there for a while, motionless and calm, watching the reflection of the first stars appear on the surface of the settling basin, faint pinpricks of light that waver and disappear when a small insect lands on the water. The white layer of starch beneath the surface is growing thicker and more solid as the minutes pass, the weight of gravity doing its silent work without any need for your assistance. This is the part of the process that requires only time, the simple, patient waiting while the fine particles drift downward through the water and find their resting place on the clay floor. The waiting is not empty. It is full of the same quiet purpose that has filled every stage of the day, a recognition that some things cannot be hurried, that the starch will settle at its own pace, whatever you do, and that your role now is simply to be present, to watch over the basin, to let the evening unfold around you as gently as it wishes. Eventually, you rise, your body moving slowly, a little stiffly, the tiredness settling deeper into your limbs now that the activity has ceased. You take the carrying basket from your shoulder and set it down, then walk along the bank of the stream for a short distance, following the path that leads back toward the village. The forest is dark now, the trees silhouettes against a sky of deep indigo, and you navigate by memory and by the pale glimmer of the stream beside you, which catches the faint light of the emerging moon and reflects it in a long, wavering ribbon. The walk is short and familiar, and before long you see the first lights of the village ahead, the warm yellow glow of oil lamps shining through bamboo walls, the shapes of houses rising against the dark backdrop of the palms, the low murmur of voices, and the smell of cooking fires drifting on the cool air. The work of washing is complete, the starch rests in its basin, and the day has turned its final corner toward the quiet hours of night. You return to the washing platform early the next morning, walking the familiar path through the forest while the mist still clings to the low places and the first pale light seeps through the canopy like water through a thin cloth. The air is cool and fresh, washed clean by the night, and it carries the scent of damp earth and the faint, sweet perfume of a flowering tree that blooms somewhere deeper in the swamp, its fragrance drifting on the still air in invisible ribbons. Your sandals make the same soft sounds on the same patches of ground, the squelch of mud, the crunch of dry leaves, the solid thud of packed earth, and these sounds accompany you like a familiar melody that you know so well you no longer hear it as separate from the quiet of the morning. The carrying basket on your back is empty and light, and you have brought with you the shallow trays made of split bamboo that you will need for the next stage of the work, their woven surfaces smooth and clean, stacked together and tied with a length of bark cord. You arrive at the settling basin as the sun clears the tree line and sends its first long rays slanting across the surface of the water, which is perfectly still and glassy. The basin is a rectangle of dark clay, its edges softened by the growth of small ferns and mosses, and the diversion channel that feeds it has been closed since the previous evening so that no new water disturbs the quiet work of gravity. You kneel at the edge and look down through the clear water, which is now almost transparent in the upper layers, tinged only slightly brown from the tannins that leach out of the fallen leaves along the stream. And beneath that transparent layer you see the starch. It lies on the bottom of the basin in a thick, pure white blanket, smooth and even, its surface faintly rippled like the sand on the bed of a calm sea. The layer is as deep as the length of your thumb, and it gleams in the early light with a soft, almost luminous quality, as if it is generating its own gentle radiance from within. You sit back on your heels and simply look at the starch for a while, appreciating the clean, solid fact of its presence. This is the reward for yesterday's long labor, the tangible result of the felling and the stripping and the rasping and the kneading, all of that effort now concentrated into this dense, white sediment that waits quietly for you to collect it. A small water beetle skates across the surface of the basin, its legs dimpling the water without breaking the tension, and it leaves behind a trail of tiny ripples that spread, without disturbing the starch below. You watch the beetle complete its journey from one side of the basin to the other, and then you stand and begin the work of draining. The draining is a delicate process because you want to remove the clear brown water without disturbing the starch that lies beneath, and you have learned through long practice exactly how to tilt the sluice so that the water flows out in a thin, controlled sheet rather than a rush. You walk to the lower end of the basin, where a shallow spillway has been cut into the clay, a narrow channel plugged with a flat stone and a wad of fibrous bark that swells when wet and forms a tight seal. You kneel beside this plug and work it loose with careful fingers, prying the stone upward and pulling the bark free, and the water begins to escape in a thin, clear trickle that runs down the spillway and soaks into the ground below, spreading out into a dark fan on the leaf litter. The sound is small and liquid, a gentle trickling that reminds you of the water clock your grandmother once used to time the soaking of rice, a steady drip, drip, drip that marks the passage of minutes without any urgency. The surface of the water in the basin drops slowly, the level receding with a patience that matches your own, and as it drops, the white layer of starch is gradually revealed, emerging from the depths like a secret rising into view. The exposed starch is wet and glossy, its surface smooth as polished marble, and it reflects the sky in a pale, muted way, catching the blue and the white of the clouds and the green of the overhanging leaves in a single blended color that has no name. You watch the water level sink further, the starch becoming more visible with each passing moment, and when the last of the clear water has drained away, you are left with a basin that holds nothing but a thick, wet cake of pure white sago flour, its surface already beginning to develop fine cracks as the air touches it and starts the slow process of drying. You do not rush to collect the starch. You let it sit for a while in the open air, the morning sun warming its surface and firming its texture, turning the glossy wetness into a matte, powdery finish that looks like fresh snow that has been sitting in the shade for a day, compacted but still soft. You walk around the basin and examine the starch from different angles, noticing how the thickness of the layer varies slightly from one end to the other, thicker near the center where the water was deepest and the settling most complete, thinner at the edges where the current was weaker. These small variations are normal, and you note them without any concern, knowing that the flour will be mixed together before it is packed, the thin and thick portions combining into a uniform product. When the starch has firmed enough to handle, you step down into the basin, your bare feet pressing into the soft clay bottom, the cool, damp earth squelching slightly between your toes. You carry a flat wooden scoop, a tool shaped something like a paddle, with a shallow curved blade, and you kneel beside the layer of starch and begin to lift it in sections, sliding the scoop under the white cake and levering it up in pieces that break along their natural fault lines, the cracks that formed during the draining. The starch lifts easily, separating from the clay bottom with a soft, moist sound, and you place each section into one of the shallow bamboo trays that you have arranged along the edge of the basin. The pieces are heavy with residual moisture, and they hold their shape as you move them, firm but fragile, like blocks of wet plaster or very dense snow. You work your way across the basin from one end to the other, collecting all of the starch, and when the scoop cannot reach the last thin layer that clings to the clay, you use your hands instead, running your palms over the bottom and gathering the final traces of white paste, which you rinse from your fingers into the trays with a little water from the stream. The basin is now empty, its clay bottom dark and smooth, and you climb out and sit on the bank, looking at the row of bamboo trays that hold the wet starch. There are 6 trays in total, each one filled to the brim with the dense white paste, its surface smooth with the back of the scoop so that it lies flat and even, ready for the drying racks. You carry the trays one by one to the drying area, a raised platform of bamboo poles set on stilts behind your house, a place that receives full morning sun and is sheltered from the afternoon rain by the overhang of a large breadfruit tree. The walk from the washing platform to the drying racks is short, perhaps 50 paces along a path that skirts the edge of the village, and you make the trip several times, each tray balanced carefully in both hands, the weight manageable but substantial, the starch wobbling slightly with each step like a firm jelly. When all the trays are on the racks, you arrange them side by side with space between, for the air to circulate, and you step back to survey your work. The trays form a neat grid of white squares against the dark bamboo, and the morning sun shines on them with a clean, bright light that already seems to be firming their surfaces, forming the thinnest possible crust that will become the dry, powdery flour you seek. The drying will take several days, and the work of those days is a gentle, patient rhythm of turning and airing and protecting. You visit the racks in the morning, after the dew has burned off, and you use a flat wooden paddle to break up the starch cakes into smaller pieces, crumbling them between your fingers and spreading them out again in a thinner, more even layer. The starch that was wet and heavy the day before is now lighter and more crumbly, its moisture content reduced by the hours of sun and wind, and it responds to your touch with a soft, dry rustle, the pieces falling apart into smaller and smaller fragments that will eventually become a fine white powder. You work the starch with the paddle and with your hands, turning it over and over, exposing every surface to the air, and then you leave it to continue drying while you go about the other small tasks of the day. You repeat this routine each morning, and each morning the starch is drier than the day before, its texture evolving from wet paste to damp crumble to a fine flowing powder that slides through your fingers like dry sand or powdered sugar. The color also changes, shifting from the glossy white of the wet cake to a matte, brilliant white that seems to reflect more light than it receives. A white so pure that it makes the bamboo trays look yellow by comparison. The smell of the starch is faint and clean, like warm flour or freshly washed cotton drying in the sun. And when you bend close to the trays, you can feel the faint warmth rising from the surface, the last of the moisture escaping into the dry air. During the drying days, you also attend to the other remnants of the process. You make a trek back to the fallen palm to collect the tools that waited there overnight, the adze and the mallet and the rasping board and the coil of bark rope, each one wiped clean and inspected before being stored in its proper place. You gather the discarded bark from beside the trunk and carry it back to the village in manageable armloads, stacking it under the cooking shelter where it will dry further and then be used as fuel. You collect the spent fibre from the draining basket beside the washing platform, now light and airy and pale tan in colour, and you spread it on a mat in the sun to dry completely before storing it in the loft of your house for future use. Each of these tasks is quiet and undemanding, filling the hours without filling your mind, leaving you calm and unhurried, moving through the days with the same steady patience that has characterized every stage of the Sago maker's work. On the morning when you judge the starch to be fully dry, a morning much like all the others with its mist and its bird calls and its soft golden light, you take a clean cotton sack from the stack you keep in the corner of your house, a sack provided by the Dutch traders who visit the coast, its fabric tightly woven and its seams double-stitched, designed to keep the flour clean and dry during the long sea voyage to other islands and other markets. You carry the sack to the drying racks and set it on the ground beside the trays, its mouth held open by a hoop of bent bamboo that keeps it accessible while you work. Then you lift the first tray and tilt it carefully over the sack, pouring the dry starch in a slow, white stream that cascades into the cotton bag with a soft, hissing sound, like the fall of fine sand or the whisper of rain on distant leaves. A puff of fine white dust rises from the sack as the starch settles, and you wave it away with a gentle motion of your hand, then reach for the next tray. You pour all the starch into the sack, using a small brush made of palm fibre to sweep the last traces of powder from the bamboo trays, ensuring that nothing is wasted. When the sack is full, the starch fills it to just below the rim, its surface a soft, white mound that shifts and settles as you lift the bag and give it a gentle shake to compact the contents. The weight is satisfying, a solid, substantial mass that represents many days of careful labor, the entire starch reserve of a single mature sago palm, now converted into a form that will keep for months without spoiling, ready to be cooked into porridge or traded for goods that the village cannot produce itself. You tie the mouth of the sack with a length of cotton cord, pulling the knot tight and then double looping it for security. The same knot you have tied on dozens of similar sacks over the years, a knot your hands could form in total darkness without any guidance from your eyes. Then you lift the sack and carry it to the small storage hut near the edge of the village, a raised bamboo structure with a thatched roof and slatted walls that allow the air to circulate, keeping the interior dry and cool. Inside, there are other sacks already waiting, the products of other palms harvested by other hands, each one a record of steady work done well. You place your sack among them, standing it upright against the wall, and you pat its bulging side once as if in farewell, a small, wordless acknowledgement of the journey that the starch will soon undertake. You step out of the storage hut and stand in the sun, the morning now fully underway, the village stirring around you with its familiar sounds of voices and cooking fires and children playing in the dirt. The sky is a clear, pale blue, and a breeze moves through the palm fronds with a sound like distant surf, steady and soothing. You walk back toward your house, passing the drying racks that now stand empty, passing the washing platform where the diversion channel continues its quiet murmur, passing the stream that slides over its pebbles with the same persistence it has shown for centuries. The work of this palm is complete, its starch safely stored and waiting for the traders who will arrive with the next change of the tide. And as you walk, you feel the deep, quiet satisfaction that comes from a task carried through every stage with patience and care, from the standing tree to the full sack, from the misty morning of the felling to the bright morning of the pouring. You think of these things without forming them into words, letting the feelings settle in your chest like the starch settled in the basin, layer by layer, calm and complete. The morning of the trade arrives without any fanfare, slipping into the village as quietly as all the mornings before it, the mist rising from the swamp and the roosters calling and the first pale light touching the leaves of the sago palms in exactly the same way they have been touched every day of your memory. You wake at your usual time, lying on the pandanus mat while the darkness softens into grey, and you feel no particular excitement or urgency, only the same calm readiness that accompanies every task worth doing. The Dutch East India Company ship is scheduled to anchor in the bay today, a visit that occurs every few months when the monsoon winds permit easy passage and the tides align with the narrow channel between the reef and the shore, and you have known this date since the last ship departed, marking the passage of weeks by the phases of the moon and the flowering of certain trees. You rise and go through the familiar motions of the morning, washing your face in the cool water from the clay jar, lighting the small fire in the cooking shelter, preparing a bowl of rice porridge that you eat slowly while sitting on the log, and watching the mist thin across the village clearing. The air is warm and still, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, and the distant salt of the sea, which you can smell more strongly today because the wind has shifted during the night and now blows gently from the coast. The cotton sack of dried sago starch waits in the storage hut, its contents fine and white and perfectly dry, and you think about it as you eat, though the thought is not a pressing one, more like a quiet acknowledgement that today the starch will move from your care into the care of others, beginning its long journey across the water to places you will never see. After you finish eating and have rinsed your bowl and banked the fire, you walk to the storage hut and slide open the slatted door, which moves on simple hinges of twisted rattan. The interior is dim and cool, smelling of dry bamboo and the faint, clean scent of the sago flower itself, which has a way of impregnating the air with its mild, powdery presence. Your sack stands where you left it, upright against the wall beside the other sacks that your neighbors have also filled in the weeks since the last ship called, each one tied with the same double-looped knot, each one representing a single palm and many days of steady labor. You run your hand over the fabric of your sack, feeling the soft, dense give of the starch within, the way it shifts slightly under pressure and then settles, and you check the knot to make sure it is still tight, which it is. You lift the sack and carry it out into the morning light, cradling it across both arms, the weight solid and manageable. The path to the shore is a well-worn trail that leads downhill from the village through a stretch of coastal forest where the trees are different from those around the swamp. More salt-tolerant species with waxy leaves and twisted wind-shaped trunks that lean away from the sea as if bracing against the perpetual breeze. The ground underfoot is sandy now, pale and fine, and your sandals leave deep impressions that fill immediately with the fine grains as you lift your feet. The sound of the forest gives way gradually to the sound of the shore, the low, steady roar of waves breaking on the reef far out, the closer hiss of smaller waves washing up the beach, the cries of gulls and terns that wheel overhead in the clear morning sky. You emerge from the trees onto the beach and stop for a moment, adjusting to the brightness and the wide open space after the dimness of the forest. The bay curves before you in a long crescent of pale sand, its edges defined by rocky headlands that are dark with spray and studded with clumps of hardy shore plants. The water inside the reef is calm and turquoise, shading to a deeper blue where the channel cuts through the coral, and anchored in the middle of the bay, swaying gently on the swell, is the company ship. It is a two-masted flight, its hull broad and practical, rather than beautiful, designed to carry cargo rather than to fight, and its sails are furled neatly on the yards, the ropes and rigging making a complex pattern against the pale sky. A small boat is already making its way from the ship toward the shore, oars lifting and dipping with a steady rhythmic splash, and you can see several figures aboard, the dark shapes of sailors and the brighter clothing of the company agents who handle the trading. You walk down the beach to the place where the village has established its trading point, a stretch of sand just above the high tide line where a simple shelter of palm thatch provides shade for the sacks and the people who wait. Several other villagers have already arrived, their own sacks of sago stacked neatly in rows, and they stand or sit in small groups, talking quietly among themselves while they watch the boat approach. You greet them with a nod and a few quiet words, the same greetings you exchange every day, and then you place your sack on the sand beside the others, adding it to the growing collection. The sacks form a small mountain of white cotton, each one identical to the next, and the sight is satisfying in a quiet way, a physical record of the village's collective work over the past months. The boat reaches the shallows and the sailors ship their oars, jumping out into the knee-deep water to guide the craft onto the sand. The company agents are two men, one older with grey hair and a weathered face that has clearly spent many years in the tropical sun. The other younger and paler, perhaps new to the islands, his expression alert and curious as he looks around at the beach and the forest and the waiting villagers. They wear simple cotton clothing, loose shirts and trousers stained with salt and travel, and they carry ledgers bound in leather and small brass scales for weighing. The older agent greets you in a mixture of Dutch and the local trade language, a simplified form of communication that both sides have used for generations. Enough words and gestures to conduct business without any need for long speeches or elaborate courtesies. You bring your sack forward when it is your turn, lifting it onto the scale, while the older agent holds the balance steady, and the younger one makes a mark in his ledger with a stick of graphite wrapped in string. The scale tips and settles, the brass weights clinking softly against each other, and the agent announces the weight in a neutral tone, a number that matches roughly what you expected based on the size of the palm and the amount of pith you rasped. The younger man records the number, his writing slow and careful, and then you are given a small token. A copper coin stamped with the company's mark, which you will exchange later for the goods you need. A length of cotton cloth, a new iron blade for your adze, a coil of brass wire for repairing the washing platform, a small bag of salt crystals that glint in the sun. The exchange happens without haste, each villager stepping forward in turn, each sack weighed and recorded, each token handed over with the same quiet efficiency. The young agent's brow furrows as he writes, the tip of his graphite stick making a faint scratching sound that you can hear between the cry of the gulls and the splash of the waves. The sailors load the weight sacks into the boat, carrying them two at a time through the shallow water and stacking them in the center of the craft, where they form a low white wall that rises gradually with each addition. The sacks are heavy, and the sailors' feet sink into the wet sand, leaving deep holes that fill with water and then smooth over as the next wave washes in. It is steady, repetitive work, and you watch it with the same calm attention you have given to every stage of the Sago making, appreciating the rhythm of the loading without needing to participate in it. When all the sacks have been weighed and loaded, the older agent closes his ledger and tucks it under his arm, exchanging a few final words with the village elder who's been overseeing the transaction. The younger agent stands at the edge of the water, looking out at the ship with a hand shading his eyes, and then he turns and walks back to the boat, his feet splashing through the shallows. The sailors push the craft off the sand and clamber aboard, taking up their oars again, and the boat moves away from the shore with the same steady, splashing rhythm that brought it in, growing smaller and smaller as it approaches the anchored ship. The sacks in the boat are visible as a white rectangle against the darker wood of the hull, and you watch them until the boat reaches the ship and the sacks are hoisted aboard with ropes and pulleys, disappearing over the rail one by one. With the trading finished, you turn away from the water and walk back up the beach, your copper token cool and solid in the palm of your hand. You stop at the trading post, a small shelter near the tree line where the company agents have set out the goods they brought for exchange, the cloth and tools and salt, and other small necessities arranged on bamboo trestles under the shade of a canvas awning. You select the items you need, handing over your token and receiving the cloth and the adze blade and the brass wire and the salt, each item wrapped in a piece of coarse paper or tied with string, and you pack them carefully into your carrying basket, which has waited empty on your back throughout the morning. The older agent nods as you make your choices, and you nod in return, the transaction complete, the obligations on both sides fulfilled. You leave the beach and walk back along the sandy path through the coastal forest, the sound of the waves growing fainter behind you with each step, gradually replaced by the quieter sounds of the inland trees, the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hornbill, and the steady thrum of insects in the undergrowth. The basket on your back is heavier now, but the weight is a pleasant one, the weight of useful things that will serve you well in the months to come, and you adjust the strap slightly and continue walking, your pace the same, unhurried rhythm that has carried you through every journey of this day and every day before it. Back in the village, you stop at your house and unload the items from the basket, placing the cloth on the shelf with the other fabrics, hanging the new adze blade on its hook beside the old one, setting the coil of brass wire in the corner where you keep your repair materials, pouring the salt into the small bamboo container with its stopper of rolled leaf. Each object finds its proper place, and the house returns to its quiet order, the bamboo walls and the woven mat and the oil lamp and the water jar all exactly as they were when you left, waiting for you with the patience of inanimate things that have no need to hurry. You step out onto the veranda and sit down on the worn bamboo bench, your back against the wall of the house, your feet resting on the edge of the platform. The afternoon is well underway now, the sun past its peak and sliding toward the west, the shadows of the palm trees stretching across the clearing in long blue fingers. The air is warm and still, and the village is quiet, many of its inhabitants resting after the morning's activity, the children napping on mats inside the houses, the adults sitting in the shade as you are, letting the heat of the day pass over them without resistance. A thin plume of smoke rises from one cook fire across the clearing, and the smell of something cooking drifts to you on the faint breeze, mild and savory, a promise of the evening meal. You think about the sago starch that is now on the ship, the same starch that was, not many days ago, a living palm at the edge of the swamp, its fronds catching the morning light and its roots drinking the dark, peaty water. You think about the long chain of actions that transformed it, the felling and the stripping and the rasping and the kneading and the settling and the drying and the packing and the weighing, each step dependent on the ones before it, each step carried out with the same patient care that you have given to every palm you have ever harvested. The starch will travel now across the sea to Batavia or Malacca, or perhaps even further, to places where the people do not know what a sago palm looks like or how the flour is made, and it will be cooked into porridge or baked into bread or mixed into puddings and soups, feeding strangers who will never know your name or see your face or walk the path to the swamp on a misty morning. This thought does not trouble you. It is simply the way things are, the quiet flow of goods through the world, and you are content to be a small part of that flow, a pair of hands that do the work well and then let it go. The afternoon passes in its slow, meandering way, the light deepening from gold to amber, the shadows lengthening until they merge into a single dusk that settles over the village like a soft grey blanket. You watch a flock of small green parrots fly overhead, their wings beating fast and their calls sharp and bright, and you listen to the evening chorus of frogs begin in the swamp, the first tentative notes growing into a full rolling song that fills the air, and then, after a time, fades back into silence. A bat emerges from the crown of a nearby palm and flits away into the gathering dark, its flight erratic and soundless, and the first stars appear above the tree line, faint and distant. The same stars that have shone on the village for all the generations you can remember and all the generations before that. You remain on the veranda as the evening deepens, not because you are waiting for anything, but because there is no reason to move. The day's work is done, and the days that follow will bring their own tasks. The tending of the garden, the repair of the washing platform's sluice, the checking of the younger palms to see which one will be ready for harvest next. But those tasks belong to another day, and tonight there is only the quiet, the warmth, the familiar shapes of the village around you, the soft glow of oil lamps appearing one by one in the windows of the houses, the murmur of voices from a home nearby where a family is sharing their evening meal. The world is at peace, and you are at peace within it, your body tired in the best possible way, your mind calm and clear. You think briefly of the sago palm that started this entire cycle, the tall, straight trunk that now lies stripped and empty at the edge of the swamp, its pith gone and its starch carried away. The palm will decay slowly, returning to the soil that nourished it, its fibers breaking down into the dark, rich humus that will feed the next generation of trees. And in that decay there is no sadness, only the continuation of a process that has been going on since the first sago seed sprouted in the swamp uncounted ages ago. You were a part of that process as much as the palm was, as much as the water and the sun and the soil are, a link in a chain that extends backward into the deep past and forward into the unseen future, and there is a deep comfort in knowing that, a comfort that settles around you like the night air, cool and gentle on your skin. You go inside when the darkness is complete and light the oil lamp, the small flame pushing back the shadows and illuminating the simple, familiar interior of your house. You eat a quiet meal of rice and vegetables, chewing slowly and tasting each flavor, and then you wash your hands and face and lie down on the sleeping mat, the woven pandanus leaves rustling softly beneath your weight. Through the bamboo walls you can hear the last sounds of the village settling down for the night. A dog barking once in the distance, a child laughing sleepily, a door sliding shut. The air is cool now, carrying the scent of the sea and the forest and the faint, lingering trace of sago flower that seems to cling to everything you own. A clean, mild perfume that is the signature of your craft. You close your eyes and let your breathing slow, feeling the tiredness in your limbs dissolve into the mat beneath you. The images of the day drift through your mind in no particular order. The white sacks lined up on the sand, the flash of the oars in the turquoise bay, the scratch of the graphite stick on the ledger page, the weight of the copper token in your hand. These images are calm and undemanding, and they fade one by one into the soft grey darkness that precedes sleep. The sago flower is on its way across the sea. The palm has returned to the swamp, the tools are clean and sharp and waiting, and you have done everything that needed to be done, exactly as it needed to be done, with patience and care, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from work completed well. The night settles over the village, and you let it take you, your breathing deep and even, your body still, your mind drifting gently toward the peaceful, dreamless rest that awaits.